Well, welcome everyone to First Freedom's live stream. I'm your host, Barry Bussey. And with me today, I have a special guest, Keith Wilson, who is a constitutional lawyer and a strong advocate for freedom in this country. And in particular, he's got two cases that are very interesting for us to be kept abreast of. And that is the case involving former Newfoundland Premier Brian Peckford, who's taking the government to court over the vaccine mandate. And also, he's representing Tamara Lich. Now, you may remember Tamara Lich was spending some inordinate amount of time, in my view, in prison or in jail because of the fact that she wasn't given bail. And so tonight we're going to talk about these two cases, and it's glad to have you aboard. And remember that we are going to be having questions at the end of our program. So if you have questions, make sure you write them down and share them with us, and we'll be able to answer them for you as our program continues. Mr. Wilson, it is a wonderful opportunity to have you with us, and we are so thankful you're here.
Thanks for having me on.
So tell me, I have been very impressed with the fact that you have taken on these cases. There are a lot of people in our profession, unfortunately, who seem to have the idea that if they represent the unvaccinated or those who are involved in the trucker convoy or anything that's related to it, that somehow is bad for their career, which seems very strange to me as a lawyer, because I've represented a lot of interesting characters over the years myself. And it's always been that as a profession, we've always enjoyed the idea of taking on clients, and we don't really look at them as saying, okay, we take them because it's necessarily going to be bad for our career. We do it because we have a duty to represent them and ensure people have a fair trial. But I want to get into that, but I also want to have you open up for us about your background and why is it you chose law?
I think I chose law because, for the reason most people do, is I wanted to try and help people. Mm-hmm. It's a very diverse career. If you've done litigation and you've got a case involving a drainage dispute, you suddenly learn about hydrology and how it's measured. Or, I look at my environmental cases and the soil sciences and hydrogeology I've had to learn about. So it's fascinating. You get to dip into all kinds of subject matters. And, the biggest gratification you can get as a lawyer is taking someone who's in a very vulnerable situation and has been harmed and remedying the harm for them. So it's rewarding in that respect.
Right. Now, you're located in Alberta. That's where your practice is?
That's right. I'm originally from Ontario. Okay. Spent a good part of my life in Alberta. I spent 6 years of my life in Vancouver in the Lower Mainland, where I started my post-secondary. And then I've spent the largest portion of my life here in Alberta, working primarily throughout the province on a variety of legal cases.
Okay. So I'm wondering about this whole situation that's going on right now with the government's reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. What do you see as the serious issues with respect to the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I think any rational person that objectively sits back and looks at the medical evidence, looks at the economic impacts, looks at the social impacts, the educational development impacts, the relationship impacts, the loss of people living a normal life, people having to cope for the rest of their lives with not being with loved ones when they died in hospitals and knowing that they died alone. Children not being able to advance in their sports and their other activities. The government has made a tremendous error, in my view. I think that's clearly what the evidence is. And that's what I think will become more clear in time. The single focus of saying that the policies effectively did at the municipal, provincial, and federal levels in Canada, that no cost is too great to save one COVID patient, was reckless and wrong.
Mhm.
Those are strong words, but that's my view. I think history will show that this was a tragic misstep by government, and that they overreacted to COVID. I remember having debates with some of the epidemiologists, and I said, "You're placing zero value on everything else." And they're like, "No, we're not." And I say, "All right, how are you balancing it? What weight are you giving to educational setbacks to children? What weight are you giving to the economic losses and the disruptions in families and people who have family businesses that they're going to lose, to the addictions increase, to the suicides? What weight are you giving to those, and how are you balancing that?"
Mm.
They weren't. It was save every COVID person, regardless of the cost. And to me, that was a huge, reckless error by government.
What do you think motivated government in that respect? I mean, because one of the things that comes to my mind is that, uh, like, I'm looking at what's happening right now in China, where they're saying that, okay, we're going to have net zero, right? So they're going to have zero COVID cases. It seems rather a large, in one way, it's kind of hubris, right? I mean, it's kind of like
Mhm.
we're somehow able to control a virus, which has never been able to be done since we've had recorded history. Um, was that the idea? Was it the idea that they're somehow going to control this thing? Um,
I don't know. I mean, it's weird because in my past, I was involved in two sort of emergency disease outbreak cases. The first was in 2003 when BSE hit Alberta and the Canadian cattle industry was decimated and the borders were shut. I was heavily involved in that case, representing the beef industry, and I was in the emergency operations centers at the time with all the various government experts. And in 2016, I think it was, I represented when H1N1 swine flu epidemic hit, and I actually represented the farm family in Alberta that was ground zero for the transmutation, the zootonic event where the swine flu had gone from a farm worker in Mexico. He came up to work on the farm in Alberta. He gave it to the hogs, and then the hogs gave it to my clients and their kids. And I, again, was in the emergency operations centers and in the room with all the public health officials and people from the premier's office and so on. And in both those instances, you get bureaucrats that would come up with these really crazy ideas that had no practicality. And in some instances, it was a guy like me or other people that put their hand up and said, "That doesn't make any sense. Have you thought through the implications of this?" And I don't think that should be the single focus of everything. We have to look at how life is going to carry on. And what I've surmised is no one was in those rooms to do that. And the politicians simply defaulted and threw the keys, the leadership keys of running our government and hence our lives, to these health bureaucrats. And it was almost like they've all got drunk on power. And, it disturbed me to no end when I would see the caution tape or the police type tape around a playground. And I thought, you know what? If you're fearful that your child will get COVID by going to the playground, keep them at home. But don't stop my kids from going if I'm not fearful of that. And so it's just been a very dark time, and we're not out of it yet, as we know. Right. Canada is still the only country in the world, second largest landmass as it would be, where you can't fly on a plane or get on a ship or a train if you're not vaccinated. So it's people are still losing their jobs because they're exercising the choice of bodily autonomy, informed consent, to decide not to get a treatment for COVID. Because at first we thought the vaccine was going to be a vaccine,
Right.
meaning it would stop you from getting it and stop you from spreading it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, every day we get the Speaker of the House, Pelosi, has got, she's double vaxxed, 2 boosters. She's got COVID. She's self-isolating at home. She has a mild case and she's doing well. Jen Psaki, the president's press secretary, has had it twice. Same thing. So, come on, we know it doesn't stop the transmission. It doesn't stop people from getting it. Yet we're treating it as this imperative for you to participate in modern life. And that's just wrong. It's discriminatory. It's oppressive. I was raised that we weren't supposed to discriminate against people and we were supposed to be respectful of people's differences. So it's a very troubling time that we're in.
Yeah, we've certainly passed in our current environment right now where we are willing to accept a minority group and discriminate against them. And it's almost in many ways a real coming down on. It's almost like I remember back in the days of going to elementary school where you pick on a particular person for whatever reason that happens in the schoolyard, but it was like everyone gathered around to watch the fight, and it's almost that brutal, it seems to me, the way in which we got our own prime minister make the statements that he did, that is kind of giving license to people to treat the unvaccinated as somehow unworthy. One of the things I've often thought about is the fact that a lot of these so-called experts who, like you say, were given the keys to run by the politicians themselves were not willing to stand up and be that other voice in the room. And as I've been listening to a number of people who've shared with me their stories about how they've been fired because of the vaccine mandate, it almost seems like a purge going on in these various companies, the government offices and so on, that are dismissing the vaccinated. And what is fascinating about these people that I spoke to is that they are the very ones who would challenge public policy, who would challenge the program, and who would be willing to voice. Because when you think about it, those who are challenging, I mean, it takes a lot of nerve to stand up to your employer and say, hey, you know what? I don't think this is right. And the fact that they would do that on this particular situation tells me that they probably have done it on others. And so now we're going to have, I'm just surmising, but it seems like in a way we're going to have the bureaucrats or the bureaucracy filled with a bunch of yes people, as well with a lot of these corporations that are making these rules. So they're losing that opportunity for someone who thinks different than whatever the narrative is. And that to me is dangerous.
Well, and it highlights why constraining free speech is dangerous, and right. Twitter banning people for raising a question about, well, why is the Canadian government not acknowledging natural immunity? Why is it, if there's any discussion about various preventative treatments or treatments to mitigate impact once you have COVID, why does that suddenly get you banned? Like, what is exactly going on here? There's been a rush to have a monolithic narrative, and no one can step outside of it. That's for sure.
Okay, so another observation I've made is that when it comes to government, when government takes on itself power, it's very rare that the government will give that power back. I mean, we've seen it with 9/11, with all of the security measures. When we go to the airport, we don't think of it anymore. But the way in which we're now being treated as we go through security at the airport, is a result in many ways from the measures that came in after 9/11. And government still has those extra powers for surveillance, for keeping tabs on things when it comes to dealing with finances, how much money is going into an account, the reports of the banks to the government as to why this large amount of cash and so forth is going on. You're always asked the question. And now government has taken upon itself more powers during this pandemic. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are with respect to the government and whether or not they're going to be releasing their powers anytime soon.
Well, unless there's a change in our elected officials, I don't think they will. And, we need one of the things that's occurred, and one of the reasons I'm doing some of these legal challenges is because I believe fundamentally that our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is important.
Yeah.
And that our system is based, it's a democracy. In other words, the party that reflects the most popular view will get more votes than the one that has a less popular view. They will then be the majority in power, and they can impose their will on others. And what we've done in Western democracies, constitutional democracies, is we said, you know what, that can be dangerous in that we should have a backstop or a safety net of basic principles that even if you are in the majority and you have the most popular views, there's certain things you can't do, because democracies are based on this idea that the most important thing in the democracy is the individual.
Right.
The individual.
Mm-hmm.
So we have basic rights and freedoms that you can't discriminate against people based on their identity factors. You can't, and on it goes. The right of freedom of assembly, the freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, legal protections. So that's the country I thought we were living in, protected by our charter and respecting the will of the majority, subject to the limits and protections that the charter imposes on the will of the majority. And what many of us are concerned about, lawyers, non-lawyers, is that in 2020 and 2021, and so far in 2022, it doesn't appear that the charter's worth the paper it was written on. So we need to have some cases that go to the courts where we can test to see if these rights are real. And if they're not, Canadians need to know about it, because maybe at the appropriate time, we need to revisit the charter and actually make sure that the rights are real.
Excellent point. And I want to dig into that, but I just want to make a mention here as well for those who are watching. You're listening to Freedom Feature live stream, and we're so very thankful that you're here with us tonight. We have Keith Wilson, who's a lawyer that's representing Brian Peckford. Remember him as the former Premier of Newfoundland, and he's also been on this program before. He also is representing Tamara Leach, and she was one of the organizers, perhaps the chief organizer there, with respect to the Freedom Convoy up in Ottawa. I encourage you to send in your questions tonight. We will ask Keith those questions and provide you answers. And so thank you so much that you're with us. So Keith, I was just going to also, I noted at the opening here that a lot of lawyers are, or at least not I say a lot, but at least a number of people have shared with me the experience that they haven't been able to get lawyers to represent them on these cases. And that there's somehow a sense of, if I represent people who are unvaccinated, then I'm going to be somehow sullying my career. But I want to tip my hat to you for taking on these cases. And I just want to know if I'm the only one that's been hearing this, or if you, in your experience with our legal colleagues, have you heard the same kind of situation that some people have been sharing with me?
Absolutely. It's tragic. The number of, well, there's two aspects to this. One is the people trying to find lawyers, and then the other is, well, where are the lawyers? So the people trying to find lawyers every day, I get voice messages, I get people find my email address, and I get unsolicited emails every day. And many of them, and as few as 5 and as many as 15 or 20 sometimes.
Wow.
And every one of them is a hardship story about what's happened to them. Sometimes it's groups of employees with various institutions and big institutions and government bodies. Others, it's individuals who have been treated very poorly from an employment situation, or they're suffering this incredible hardship because they can't travel to get back to look after a dying loved one in another country, and just awful, awful stories. And I'm working day and night, and most weeks 6 days a week, and some 7. So there's only so much I can do. So I'm almost always having to say no. And they always want to know, well, who can I get? And I'm usually saying, I don't know. So why is it, when I get calls from lawyers in the big firms, and I won't identify any of them if they're getting nervous right now listening to this, that cheer me on, but they won't dare touch a case. They won't dare. And they're really happy that I'm doing what I'm doing, but they want nothing to do with it. So what's going on there? Well, one of the things that's happened in our legal business is consolidation, right? When I started off practicing 27 years ago, a big firm was 25 lawyers.
Right.
What's that now? A small firm. It'd almost be a boutique, right?
Right.
A big firm now has 5,000 lawyers in offices around the world or more. So there's a fear that some of them have that if they were to take on one of these cases, there might be a partner that's working for the health authority, or another partner is doing the trademark work for one of the pharmaceutical companies. You go down the list, right? And we don't want to upset the client. Therefore, we're not going to take the case. That's one of the reasons I left the big firms, was I was so tired of the conflicts and not being able to take the cases I wanted to take. And I couldn't take them because some partner 3 floors up or 2 floors down in the downtown office tower was working for someone on the other side. So I think that's what's driving it. And I'm probably the last guy to ask this question to, because maybe I'm foolish to do this. I don't know, but I don't care. I'm very confident that I'm on the right side of history. I'm doing this because I believe fundamentally in it. I shared with you as we were getting warmed up, and maybe I should share with your audience, like, how I found myself in these particular cases. And anybody who looks up my history, so my law firm's Wilson Law Office, and you'll see the types of cases I've taken on where people have had water wells contaminated by an oil and gas company, or animals killed on their farm due to a release of gases. And so I've taken on a lot of cases. I've taken on government a lot of times. And I have this bad habit of saying yes too much. So my wife, who we've been together now for 35 years, and we have 4 kids, the oldest is 27 and the youngest is 17. It's been her job in our marriage to be my gatekeeper. And when I say that, I've just been approached by this person, it's a terrible situation they're facing, it's going to be a very difficult fight, but I think I might be able to help them. She's like, no, you're too busy. You cannot do this. So, and my wife, by the way, is a retired university trained registered nurse. So she understands things medical.
Right.
And so as COVID came and 2020 evolved into 2021, and she was watching it from a medical science point of view and starting to go, that doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense, and looking into things. She's also very apolitical. But then she started to see the impact of the government restrictions and the policies, and she's definitely not an anti-vaxxer.
Mm-hmm.
So she came to me last fall, and she said to me that she was so concerned about what she was seeing happen to our country that she said I needed to get involved and I needed to take on a case and use my skills as a litigator and someone who can fight government, as well as a lot of my cases have been very high profile. So I'm comfortable talking on a camera and in front of a microphone,
Right.
to combine those skills to try and fight back for some of our freedoms. So just before Christmas, I was approached by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, the JCCF, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. And they said, we really need some more senior counsel. We've got great teams of lawyers, but we need some senior folks. Would you be willing to take on a case? And I said, sure. They said, pick anyone you want. And I said, I wanted to go after the travel mandate. And so the requirement and the discrimination against people who are exercising choice. Like, it just makes zero sense to say that somehow two people who are vaccinated sitting in row 7 are at a different risk level than a person in row 8 sitting beside an unvaccinated person. It's just patent nonsense.
Right.
Patent nonsense. It's fairy dust.
And as you mentioned, that we are the only country in the world that has this vaccine mandate policy, that you can't fly, go on a ferry, go on a train if you're unvaccinated.
Right. And so I took that one on, and then just to pause on that case for a minute before I switch to the other one and see how I got involved in that one, because I think it's important. Is what happened was I looked at all the other cases that had gone to the courts and been unsuccessful, where the courts had basically wrote a blank check to the government and say, you do whatever you, if it is COVID, hey, whatever you want to do. Oh, we're going to strip this person of this business right, and we're going to close all these businesses down. Courts, no problem. Did you say COVID? Okay, go ahead. Right?
Yeah.
That nonsense. So I looked at them and I said, okay, how am I going to win this case? Like, what's the path forward? So I started with a blank piece of paper. I looked at all the charter breaches I thought we could establish. Obviously, Section 6 mobility. Candidates have the right to move freely within the country and out and inside of the country. Yeah, I think the travel mandate crosses that one. Then we looked at other ones, and the team of lawyers that I'm blessed to work with from the Justice Center. Then we went into the Section 1 analysis. So for those who aren't that familiar with constitutional law, how it works is, as soon as we establish that your charter right has been breached, the government can either say, okay, you're right, we give up, we'll repeal our order or law, and we'll respect the charter. Or the government can say, you know what? Yeah, we are breaching Section 6 mobility rights, but it's justified. It's justified in a free and democratic society under Section 1. So the onus shifts to the government, to the Attorney General, to provide evidence to show that the restriction is justified, and it's demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. For those legal people out there, it's called the Oak test, and it's got a 4.4-part branch. So I laid out all the branches, and I said, well, what is the government going to argue? And then I'm like, okay, what do we need to counter it? So one of this idea is balancing of harms. So, for example, one of our applicants, we've got 6 of them in the Charter Travel Challenge, is a young male between the ages of 18 to 25 who's an athlete. Well, why is he important? Because of the risk of myocarditis is higher from the vaccine, according to all the medical studies, than it is from COVID. So that person is making a rational choice if they decide not to get the vaccine, because they've decided the risk-benefit analysis. So I went through and we built the applicants to meet all the different things that we felt we needed to do. And then we had Premier Peckford, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be hanging out with the last surviving drafter and founding father of our modern 40-year-old Constitution. and the symbolism of the drafter of that charter and constitution suing Prime Minister Trudeau and the federal government, saying you are breaching my charter rights, was a very significant aspect of the case.
Powerful. Absolutely powerful.
And so it was we filed in January a very comprehensive originating application with the federal court, and it was the Freedom Convoy started in late January. I was watching it as most other Canadians were, and on February 1st, I was sitting in this chair. I was about to get on a Zoom call with my legal team, and I noticed that there was some people I didn't invite in the waiting room. Said to one of the lawyers, "What's going on? Who are these people?" They said, "Let them in." It turned out that the Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, and some of the other original organizers and people who started the Freedom Convoy, who were now in Ottawa and moving into their first full week there, February 1st, had said, we need legal help. And we need legal help to deal with setting up our not-for-profit, dealing with all these donations, dealing with all these various other legal issues. And so the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms had agreed to represent them. And I was asked to lead a team of 5 lawyers, and we flew in the next day. And I was on the ground in Ottawa at the side of Tamara and Chris and all of the other freedom fighters for 19 days. And it was one of the most incredible experiences of my career. There were very long days. I did the negotiations with the police, negotiated the agreement that we had with the mayor, faced the consequences of the Emergencies Act proclamation, tried to counter so much of the misinformation, like the one that really keeps coming up more recently because it's Trudeau's new line, is that these people were insurrectionists and trying to overthrow the government. The people involved in the Freedom Convoy were absolutely clear that they were there because of their concern about government overreach,
right,
and the government not respecting civil liberties and their rights and freedoms. Their request was for the federal government to lift the mandates for truckers and for all Canadians for travel, and for the provincial governments to lift theirs, and for municipalities to lift theirs, and for companies to lift theirs. That was their blanket request, is give us our freedoms back. Calm down about this COVID stuff, and let's live our lives as Canadians. There was this fringe group that showed up called Canada Unity. They've been around for over a year, before the convoy was a thing, and they came up with this thing called the MOU. And this MOU had this crazy idea in it that if you got enough people to phone or send a petition to the Governor General, that the Governor General could ride into the Parliament on a unicorn and sprinkle fairy dust around, and magically a citizens committee would take over the government. And just like, oh my God, like, well, okay, whatever, but that's not why we're here. So the leaders always said, and if you go back to some of their press conferences, they said the only way governments change in Canada is through elections, and we're not in an election. And they weren't even calling for an election.
Right.
So there's this smear campaign that keeps coming up, and people get riled up about it. Oh, but they were trying to overthrow the government. No, they weren't.
Yeah.
And the record is clear on that. So it was fascinating to be on the ground with them and deal with the issues. Tragic, the violent beatings that occurred that were unnecessary. And then the political prisoner stuff that goes on to this day of arresting Canadians for exercising their lawful right of peaceful protest is reprehensible.
Absolutely. I want to come back to this, but I also want to, your comments raise a question that I really would like your opinion on, and that is this. I have observed all of these various cases over the last couple of years, really. And I've been talking to some other lawyers as well who've been sharing with me the struggles that they've had in dealing with the courts on this issue. It's like, okay, as the lawyers, or a number of lawyers, not wanting to take on these cases, then when we do get the cases in court, it seems like the judges themselves now are like, this is a hot potato, and they don't want to be dealing with it, or at least they're very reticent. They keep saying things that I've heard are things like, well, we're not going to be judging or making judgment calls on the science of COVID and this kind of thing. And I find that very strange because obviously you're going to be dealing with the issues that particular case deals with, but also, since when have judges not made decisions about areas of concern that they are not really experts in, if you know what I mean? Like, for example, a judge will make a decision on education, but they're not teachers. A judge will make a decision dealing with the airline industry, but they're not pilots. I mean, like, I don't understand what's happening here. And the other thing is that I've noticed that these cases are being put off for months down the road. And it almost seems, well, I mean, the sense that people are getting is like, are the courts just not interested in dealing with these cases?
Well, there's a lot there. I think what I would say is this. First, to your first point about we're not going to deal with the science, I'd say, oh, you mean the evidence?
Yeah.
We're not going to deal with the evidence.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, wait a minute. I'm going to have to go back to law school, because what I was taught is legal decision-making involves evidence.
Yes, right.
The discovery of the truth, what happened, what is true and what is false, and then applying legal principles to those facts, right?
Right.
So in law, we have this concept, as you'll know, of judicial notice, where a court can dispense with the need for you to lead evidence about a notorious fact. So, for example, in a motor vehicle accident, I do not need to bring to court an astrophysicist to prove that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The court takes judicial notice of that. I don't need to bring in a physicist for the court to acknowledge that there's gravity. However, if I want to prove what the G-force was on something in a particular situation, in some aircraft accident or something, I do need to bring in an expert to deal with that kind of minutia. Right. So what happened is the court started early on in COVID, the first cases, they took judicial notice of a whole range of things. And some of them I'm not so hung up on, like, is there a pandemic or not? Because I don't think so much turns on that per se. But they took judicial notice that, vaccines are effective at stopping people from getting and transmitting. Well, how did that turn out? They took judicial notice of all these things, so they didn't have to deal with it. They didn't have to weigh the contentious evidence. And in the early days, there was a few medical experts that would stick their neck out and they were crushed. And now there's hundreds and literally thousands of medical experts with tremendous credentials around the world that have said enough. This needs to be spoken to. So I'm hoping that with the passage of time that we've had, that we've moved out of Delta and into Omicron, and in the early days, I didn't know anybody who had COVID. Now I pretty much, I would say, of my circle of interactions, less than 5% of the people I know haven't had COVID. Right. I've had COVID. Everybody in my family's had COVID. My 90-year-old mother-in-law's had COVID. She's still alive. She's coming over for dinner tonight. We're in a different time zone, so it's okay for you guys in Ontario.
Yeah.
In Alberta. And so people are like, okay, a lot of people anyway, there's still those. So that's one point, is that the courts initially were too quick to take judicial notice of things and not actually require evidence and the weighing of facts. And I think we got such groupthink going. No one wanted to be the person. I just thought of this analogy. It's not a good one, but I'll use it anyway. Imagine being on an airplane. This is not a pleasant thought, and thinking you smell smoke and looking around, but not wanting to be the person to push the button to get the flight attendant to come, right? It was like nobody wanted to be the person to say, no judge, wait a minute, is this really right, what we're doing here? So I'm hoping now that with the passage of time, there's far more cases actively before the courts. We've had some positive rulings out of the US Supreme Court. We've had a very positive ruling out of New Zealand with their high court effectively adopting the Oakes test and said it doesn't pass their restrictions. I'm hopeful, but I was in court this morning virtually, which I'm okay with that part. There's a great savings to the client in me being able to get ready 20 minutes and do my appearance and then immediately switch to another file. So there's huge efficiencies. I'm okay with that part. But one of the things they do, I had the judge off on one side of my screen, and then they had the actual empty courtroom. And what I could see in that empty courtroom was, first of all, plexiglass everywhere.
Right.
I joked with we were out at our lake property in 2020, and that's where we hid out with my mother-in-law to keep her safe. And someone put on these massive fireworks show. And my neighbor said, "Who's that?" And I said, "I think that's the guy with the plexiglass business." Right? It's like, I mean, could you imagine if buying a plexiglass business in February, like January 2000 or 2020? Like, oh my God. Yeah. But anyway, on all seriousness, so in the court, there's plexiglass here, but there's these huge X's in white tape blocking off every other chair, every other space at counsel's table. And I thought, there was no judge there. The judge was probably at her home, and because she had the fake court background, and I could see it when her hair moved. Right. Virtual, which is fine. I have no problem with that. But I thought, wow, what a stark, psychological device to sense urgency. It's just like if you went somewhere and all there was armed guards, you'd be thinking, whoa, what's the danger here, right? So we've created this really psychological, weird environment in which we're living, everybody being masked and so on. So I think that's had an influence. But I am really hoping that if we put together really compelling evidence, and we filed all our expert reports in the Peckford case. We filed all our lay affidavits in the Peckford case. We're about to get bombarded. We found out yesterday that the federal government is going to have 12 to 14 affidavits for us to review and cross-examine on. And that's another thing, like the nature of the case. Right. So I do a lot of judicial review work, administrative law. And one of the things I've learned is that's actually not an area where a lot of lawyers practice. They do commercial litigation. They may do personal injury litigation. They may do regulatory work before regulatory board, Securities Commission, Labor Relations Board, whatever. But not a lot of lawyers do a high volume of judicial review. And so what's interesting about a charter challenge is you get to examine the rationale for the government's decision and force the government disclose its rationale, which is very important in our current circumstance with understanding why they have these restrictions. But you also get to bring expert evidence about it. So they've got to bring their experts to say, yeah, the federal minister got it right when he said it's too dangerous to let an unvaccinated person sit on a plane with a vaccinated person. And we get to have our experts say that's nonsense, and here's why. So I think we're doing this case differently. We might lose, but we might win. And it's as I heard former Premier Peckford interviewed on another program, it might even have been yours, I'm not sure, where he talked about he's skeptical about the courts and he's lost some faith, but he's clear. And I think he's right. And this is my answer, and I adopt it by reference, that we have to exhaust these things. We have to take them. So we're in the federal court. We're hoping to have our hearing occur in September. We'll be writing our comprehensive legal arguments and our briefs over the summer in July and August, and we'll be doing our cross-examination starting in a few weeks for about 5 weeks, I think, is our window to complete all our, maybe 6 weeks to complete all our cross-examinations. So if we're unsuccessful, it's our intention to appeal that decision to the Federal Court of Appeal. And if we're unsuccessful there, we'll be appealing it to the Supreme Court of Canada. Because we need our courts to rule. We need our courts to rule and clarify whether we do have rights under the Charter or whether they're a joke.
Yeah. And I think that's extremely important to have these cases ongoing, because what we don't want to have a situation is to have cynicism being the rule of the day when it comes to our institutions. Like if we are cynical that it's a waste of time to go to the court, that judges are just simply going to agree with the government anyhow, then we're in a very, very serious problem as a democracy. And so the work that you're doing, that JCCF is doing, is extremely, extremely important. I just hope that as we carry on, and as you carry on with that case, that the government doesn't suddenly decide at the last minute, oh, by the way, we're going to just drop this now, and so the case is mute and all of that kind of thing.
We're ready for that.
Okay.
And our position is, and we've made it clear to the government, that we will be doing everything we can for it to go ahead, because the government itself has said just because they've taken a restriction away today, they may need to bring them back in the fall.
Right.
So, or they may need to do this again. So the severity of the imposition of loss of rights, the restriction on fundamental rights, is so profound and significant and unprecedented that it is imperative that the court rule, because they need to lay out the guidelines. Just on that note, to kind of blend a couple things together. Yep. One of the things that the Freedom Truckers in Ottawa called for, I've already explained what they didn't call for, which is the overthrow of the government. They didn't even call for an election, because they simply wanted the current government to drop the mandates and respect the Charter. But what they did say is, and they consulted Premier Peckford on this, was, how do we assume we get lucky here and the government's come to their senses and enough Canadians demand action and the government does drop these mandates? How do we prevent another government from just doing it again? And one of the discussion around that, and they wrote a letter that's very public, that the Freedom Convoy truckers, to all of the elected officials, the MPs, the Prime Minister, the provincial premiers, and said, here's what we think you should do: drop all these mandates. And they said, we think you need to call a public inquiry, Royal Commission style, into what happened here. What did the politicians get right? What did the public health officials get right? And what did they get wrong? What was the cost of this on education and children? What was the cost of this on the economy and society and so on, and to our healthcare system and all of these other things? So that we can learn from this, so that we hopefully don't make these tragic mistakes again. The other thing that was very sophisticated that they asked for, and this is Premier Peckford's idea, is calling upon the federal and provincial governments to do a constitutional reference. Because you may recall that under our Constitution, provincial governments and the federal government have a unique right called a constitutional reference. If they believe that they need an interpretation on the Constitution or the Charter, they don't have to do as we're doing on the Peckford case, first go to federal court, then go to the Federal Court of Appeal, and then go to the Supreme Court of Canada. They can go straight to the Supreme Court of Canada. And Peckford, in fact, when he was in the negotiations in 1981 and 82, negotiating the Charter, did 3 references, and he holds that as a record of the only premier that's taken the federal government on a reference 3 times on 3 different issues to the Supreme Court of Canada. So it's open for the governments to do a constitutional reference on a number of very targeted questions relating to COVID restrictions and whether in fact they were constitutional or not, or whether they were an unjustified violation of Canadians' rights. So, these Freedom Convoy guys are very thinking Canadians. They were, for the most part, almost exclusively independent truckers. In other words, they don't drive for Walmart or some big transport company. They're their own independent people that own their own trucks. They're entrepreneurs and they're problem solvers. And when they were effectively put out of work by this mandate saying they couldn't cross the border, they said, this is all wrong. It's been wrong. And we're going to go to Ottawa and protest and try and get the government's attention.
Yeah, no, excellent. And I see we've got a lot of questions here. I want to just touch base on this Tamara Leach situation with her bail.
Sure.
This really, really shocked me that someone like her would be literally shackled and not given bail on her first hearing. That to me just, I was just tell us in your view about this situation and whether it was normal for her to be so long in jail and being denied bail in a situation like this.
Sure. So let me just step back for a minute to explain my role. One of the things that I did with the other lawyers from the Justice Center. So remember, I'm with my own firm. I agreed to be a contract lawyer to the Justice Center on Premier Peckford's charter challenge. Mm-hmm. And then I agreed to be external counsel, contract lawyer to the Justice Center representing the Freedom Convoy truckers.
Right.
And Tamara is one of those. She was the president. She was one of the leaders. There's several other that I won't name, but they're publicly known. They're my clients and the Justice Center's clients with respect to the various legal issues they face. Mm-hmm. I'm not a criminal lawyer. Right. So one of the things we did when we were on the ground anticipating that criminal charges might be coming was we put together a roster of criminal lawyers and a 1-800 number that the truckers could call, and you would get the first available criminal lawyer, and then the next guy call, get the next one. So we put that system in place when we were on the ground there. But so Tamara has her own criminal lawyer, as she should. So I'm not advising on the criminal matters. I'm aware of them, obviously, because I'm sort of in an oversee role on all matters related to it. But so we followed the bail hearings very closely. Myself and some of my other members of the team, we collaborated with the criminal lawyers doing the work. The fact that she wasn't just released on a recognizance was amazing to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's no threat to anybody. Right. She has no criminal history. She works in an administrative function for an oil and gas service company. She used to be a 911 dispatcher. Again, no criminal record. She's just a little bit more than 5 feet tall. She's a beautiful human being that cares about her country and her community and her children and her grandchildren. She's of Métis heritage. For when she was brought into court the second time, for her to be chained and shackled was the affirmation for those of us who are looking at this objectively, that she had pissed off the prime minister too greatly, and he was showing her, the petulant child prime minister that we have, because that's the only objective way I think you can describe him. He's entitled. He cannot stand being criticized, and he's drunk on power, and anybody who dare criticize them is going to be punished. So she was denied bail on ridiculous grounds. The judge was extreme. One of the things that I noticed between the original bail hearing for Chris Barber and then the second bail hearing, which was Tamara Leach's bail hearing, and then the judge adjourned it over the Family Day weekend to come back and render a decision on Tuesday morning. Right. So the judge was calm in the first two hearings. The judge was exceptionally emotional when she rendered her decision. Like, I was struck by it. I was like, what is going on here? Why is this judge so emotional? That's not what judges are supposed to do.
No.
So I was very disappointed.
It reminded me when I looked at it myself. It was kind of like uh, with you. I was very struck by that, but I was struck by the political nature of the decision.
And her statements, we are, like it was like it'd be akin to putting the victim's family member up as a judge, and so it was disappointing, but that's why we have appeals. That's why we have opportunities for bail review. And so the next judge determined that it was not appropriate for her to continue to be incarcerated for the charge of counseling mischief.
Yeah, really.
And by the way, at no time did I see her engage in mischief while she was there. She doesn't own a truck. She didn't honk a horn. She has no horn to honk, which is just remarkable. But she was the figurehead of a movement that embarrassed our prime minister and challenged his legitimacy and his credentials. And retribution has come. So when she was ultimately released, however, her bail conditions would make Putin envious. His Volany, Putin's leading opposition critic who's jailed, was able to, in the early days of the horrific invasion of Ukraine, Volany, Putin's critic, was able to, from jail, call upon Russians to protest in the streets. He was able, from jail, to give foreign governments, including Canada's, a list of oligarchs' assets to freeze. Tamara Leach's bail conditions say that, things like she cannot use social media of any kind, in any form, directly or indirectly, and she's a mother and a grandmother. And we all know how mothers and grandmothers communicate with their kids now. It's through Facebook and things.
That's right.
Instagram. But it went further and said that she cannot directly, indirectly, physically, financially support any criticisms of government COVID policies or support of freedom protests.
Incredible.
And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Putin must have sent something to Trudeau and said, wow, man, you're really figuring this stuff out. You're getting this authoritarianism down. And probably wondering how Putin wasn't able to do it to Volany. So, I mean, I'm being aggressive here because this has happened. It's real.
Yeah.
The idea that someone, and there's no active protest anywhere. I mean, when Trudeau brought in the Emergencies Act, all of the protests at the border crossing, which the truckers in Ottawa had nothing to do with. Think about this for a minute.
Right.
It's winter. Right. If you think closing a border is a good idea, you drive to the border. If you think the proper thing to do is to send a message to the government, you drive all the way to the nation's capital, way up in Ottawa. And that's where they went. There was no communication coordination. It was a spontaneous grassroots sympathy thing that happened at these various borders. But the reaction of the government and the system to impose this level of restrictions on her, when as of the weekend, they were all gone. The weekend of the 12th or the 18th, 17th of February, all the border things were lifted. And then the only thing left was Ottawa. Yep. And when I was there, I was always struck by the contrast between what I physically saw with my own eyes and where I could travel with my own feet and legs from what was being portrayed on the legacy media.
Absolutely.
It was.
I had the same experience. I was up there for 3 days myself, and it was just like it was like walking in or being in a country where we had so much dissonance. We had the mainstream media on one side, and then, like you say, as I'm walking down the street talking to people, it's like absolutely crazy what was happening. 1 second, sorry. It looks like I've got a
I think you got a winner there. I think you won something.
Uh,
So
I
once
think
you,
I won something, but I don't know what I won.
yeah. So some of
Oh,
these new apps, like it's almost impossible to turn them off. I'm
you know
hitting
what?
buttons. And
And I think that's the thing. I had to shut off the the phone altogether,
there you go.
I had it already muted,
Right.
it was, I think, the WhatsApp.
So the streets, one of the things that this group that came together and became the organizers, a lot of people don't realize this. Well, how did they know where to park? Do you know how the trucks knew where to park? The city and the Ottawa police gave them maps
That's right. And
and said,
incredible.
park here, park
Yeah,
here. They said Coventry, which is the parking lot at the baseball diamond. They
right.
set that, the police and the city set that aside and said, park your extra trucks and vehicles here and set up your camp here.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the truckers were concerned about and the leadership was emergency lanes. So they made sure that any block captain, that they always maintained an emergency lane. Even on Wellington, there was an emergency lane.
Yes. Yes.
So that via emergency vehicles could always get through. These are logistics people. They think about these things, right?
Right.
A lot of them were former paramedics and former army officers and former police officers and former CSIS agents were helping with this because they all lost their jobs because they were exercising their choice of bodily autonomy and not getting a forced vaccine. So the juxtaposition as to what really happened, one of the Crown prosecutors was going off in one of the bail hearings against Tamara about her trying to move trucks on Sussex and Rideau. And he obviously didn't realize that was at the request of the mayor and the police, and she was trying to help move the trucks. Wow. So yes, she helped move trucks where the police and the mayor asked them to. People just don't know these things. It's documented. I was in the meetings. We have letters back and forth between Tamara and the mayor. The mayor issued a press release. We have extensive text messages back and forth with the police liaisons. There's pictures in media and elsewhere of me and her out on the road amongst the trucks with the police liaison discussing the logistics of moving trucks and where the police were asking them to be moved to. So I see this as a vindictive, politically motivated witch hunt in an effort to punish Canadians for standing up to Trudeau. And that is disturbing and should be disturbing to all Canadians.
Absolutely. And, it's something that right now the Prime Minister seems to be wanting to move on. That happened yesterday. Today is a new day. But the reality is for 9 days, this country was under the Emergencies Act and everything else that flowed with it. It strikes me that we must not ever forget what has happened here. And we need to recognize that this is not how we want to be as a country. We want to be a free country, a liberal democracy, and every single word of that, a liberal democracy, representative democracy. And what we experienced in this last year was absolutely reprehensible.
I don't think they're done. I think, the Prime Minister may be trying to signal that, but I obviously there's things I can't share. Yeah. But I can tell you that things happened this afternoon involving police and things that if I were to share them, I'm not going to, you would conclude they're not done. They are not done. This witch hunt is not over, my friend. I wish
you know what? You know what? This is disturbing. We are seeing right now live across the world, we are seeing what's happening in China. And from what I understand with this massive lockdown over there, in Shanghai, from the various sources that I've been trying to make sense of what was happening and listening to the people yelling and screaming out of their windows in these apartment buildings, having people literally jump out of the building because they've been in there for like 4 weeks, some of them.
Killing their pets.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is insane. And from what some commentators have said, is that this is not so much concerned about COVID, but COVID is being used as the reason to lock up. But there's actually politics behind it, and so we're in a time right now where we've got so much going on with government. This government is obviously heading towards the digital ID, digital currencies, all of these kinds of things, and this is no longer people say, well, this is all conspiratorial and all the rest of it. But my good friend, I'm sure you know as well, Bruce Party, refers to these people as the perceptive pundits. And because suddenly what these people were talking about, we're now seeing, right? I mean, here it is, this reality.
Absolutely.
Sorry, you're going to mention something.
Yeah, no, it's troubling that these people who were so dismissed, and I even wanted to think they were conspiracy theorists in 2020 and into 2021, have proved to be prophetic in terms of predicting where we would be. And so, but my micro point was, I don't think Trudeau wants to move on yet. He is very upset about how his brand has been damaged, particularly in Europe, when he went over and addressed the European Union, and he was chastised by members of parliament publicly in the European Parliament for his tyrannical and oppressive and authoritarian conduct and his violations of the basic principles of a democracy that Canada once stood for. And I think that's embarrassed him. And he would like to reset the dialogue. But I can assure you from things that are happening real time in my office today, that the efforts of his government to continue to seek out those who embarrassed him is not over.
Wow. That's shameful. Absolutely shameful. If it's okay with you right now, Keith, we've got a number of questions. Can we go to those?
Sure. 100%.
Okay. All right. So Finney and Arlene Flores, what can be done to change our system, and how soon can it happen so that our rights and freedoms are respected, such as unvaxxed being able to fly again? Well, good question. We've been bouncing around that.
But I can answer it this way, just so everybody's clear.
Yep.
The order that prevents people from flying and normal transport in Canada unless you're vaccinated is a ministerial order. So the federal minister, Alabagra, need tomorrow simply sign a piece of paper saying, I hereby rescind interim order number 58, re-COVID travel measures, effective immediately. Boom. Sign it, publish it, it's done. That's how easy it is.
Right.
You don't have to recall Parliament. Doesn't have to go through the House of Commons and 3 readings and royal assent and then go off to the Senate. None of that. They can simply do it. Just like every other developed country in the world that put these measures, similar measures in. Most didn't, but the few that did have all gotten rid of them. But for Canada, what makes us so special?
Yeah.
The other measure, the other way, is through going to court, which we've talked about and we're doing on the most expedited basis we can with the best applicants and witnesses that we can in an effort to convince the court that the government's policy is wrong at law and is a violation, an unjustified violation of the charter. So those are the two ways. The government can come to its senses and stop trying to punish and stop trying to promote politics of division and do the right thing. And the minister can do that tomorrow morning. I just drafted it for him. It's all he's got to write.
But isn't it interesting? Because it really does, this is what is so concerning about this situation. It really is that simple, right? And it does seem that this is a matter now of pure politics. And it's like, who are you to tell us what to do? We're going to tell you what to do. That seems to be the impression that I'm getting from this government. Okay. Okay. Someone just mentioned here about common sense right now. Right. So how do we get around it? I think we've got that one. I'm not sure what we got around what she's referring to. That was something. I'm not sure what that refers to. They're all still saying that it's only vaccines that save you. Okay, someone here saying COVID flu. What else we have here? Okay, yeah, people are still wearing their masks. Okay. We will appreciate this open, true discussion to bring light to the darkest time. Okay. Thank you for fighting for our rights with the truckers. So lots of appreciation here, Keith, for you and your work. Okay, the same in Windsor at the bridge. It was the government that closed it off before sending the police and snipers.
Let me just talk about this point that I think is important, if I can, and feel free if you want to keep going through the viewer comments. But one of the things that was remarkable is when the Emergency Act was proclaimed and the emergency regulation was issued and the emergency order was issued. There was two orders. One dealt with the financial matters and the freezing of bank accounts, which was incredible what happened there. And 9 of my clients had their accounts frozen. But just back to this whole, the rhetoric from the police and the rhetoric from the politicians, they said that because the Emergencies Act had been invoked, that Canadians could no longer protest in downtown Ottawa and had to leave, and that being in downtown Ottawa was illegal, an illegal protest. Right. Well, what was written right into the order, and anybody can look it up, and I'm just going to look at the actual wording off to one of my screens here. It says that the purpose of bringing in this special temporary measures to deal with the emergency, measures to regulate or prohibit any public assembly, other than lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent that may be reasonably expected to lead to a breach of peace. So they put right in there that we're going to prohibit public assembly, but not lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent. That's what the lawyers wrote into the emergency thing. Then it went on to say, and I have it right here, and I think
just gaslighting us. Wow. Yeah.
Well, it said, because when I heard the police chief say that, and they set up, before they did the raids, they announced this red zone concept. It was a defined area. And then they said,
if I could just, by the way, the red zone was a huge, massive area compared to what the protest was, at least from what we could see.
Absolutely. The protest area would have covered about less than 5% of the geographic area that was the red zone.
Yeah.
But the police said that they had set up over 100 roadblocks, check stops, leading into the red zone, because what they were worried about was thousands of Canadians coming from Ontario and Quebec and in the surrounding areas and coming in to support the truckers. And they didn't want that because they already had enough people downtown to begin with. And it was amazing still the number that got through. But if they hadn't had those check stops, I don't think the police would have had sufficient forces, even with the massive numbers they brought, to deal with the freedom-loving Canadians. But so here's the police chief said that if you go downtown, you can't go downtown because it's an illegal public assembly. To do so as a public assembly. Well, here's what the actual order says, trying to get rid of the glare and get my orientation right on this reverse camera, is it says, you cannot go downtown Ottawa, basically. A person must not participate in a public assembly that may be reasonably expected to lead to a breach of the peace by, and it was 3 things. If you're doing one of the 3 following things, you're not allowed to go to downtown Ottawa, and it's illegal. If you're not doing any of the 3 things I'm going to read, you're allowed to go downtown, okay? The first thing is, if you're going to engage in a serious disruption of the movement of persons or goods or serious interference with trade, That was not happening. You could freely move around every street except for those blocked by the police, because every street that had a truck on it had an emergency lane. I know that when I first arrived, I was driven by taxi right to the lobby entrance of my hotel downtown, as was everybody else. So you couldn't interfere with the movement of trade. And that was really targeted at the borders. B, interference with the functioning of critical infrastructure, defined as hospitals and ferry ports and terminals and bus terminals and things like that. So if you were planning on going downtown Ottawa, but not interfering with trade and not interfering with critical infrastructure, you were allowed to go. And here's the third one. You couldn't go into downtown Ottawa if you were going to the support of or the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property. So if you were going there to engage in serious acts of violence against persons or property, you weren't allowed to go. And we always said, the truckers always said, if you're coming here for that, don't come. You're not with us. Right. We're about peaceful protests. So we're watching this. The police chief and the prime minister and the public safety minister say that anybody who goes into downtown Ottawa to join with the protest is participating in a illegal protest. And I'm reading the actual proclamation going, no, they're not. What are you talking about? So it was like the lawyers knew at federal justice that the politicians couldn't do what they were thinking, and they wrote it properly. So we wrote a cease and desist letter to the police chief just before the raids began, putting him on notice that his public statements were completely inaccurate. He needed to get legal advice. His actions were unlawful, and the actions of his officers would be unlawful because clearly Canadians continued to have the charter right to be there. The proclamation said they have the right of lawful advocacy, protest, and dissent, and said they only didn't if they were going for violence or interfering with critical infrastructure and trade, none of which people were doing. So, it's just remarkable how the news media, the legacy media just lapped it up. Not one of them even seemed to have read what the actual proclamation said. Not one of them seemed to ask a single hard question. And I think we know why. I'm old enough to have dealt with reporters that were objective, asked me hard questions. I never knew whose side of the issue they were on. I didn't know how the story was going to come out till it was printed. And I also used to work and interact with communication specialists that work for government. All of these people in these global CTV, CBC are now communication specialists for the government. The government spends billions of dollars on them now. So we've lost the media. They're promoting the government narrative, and we've got to keep speaking truth to power. We need to be thinking critically and not let the people who are currently in power ruin our country.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, it's individuals like yourself who are taking on these cases and who are willing to speak out, which is so absolutely necessary for this country to be able to continue to be a country of freedom. There is one question left, and I'm not sure how much you'll be able to refer to it. It's a little bit off topic in the sense of what we wanted to talk about tonight, but I wanted to honor you, Geraldo, for being willing to ask the question. Could Mr. Wilson comment on Pastor Arthur Pawlowski's case in Calgary? And maybe you could be able to just briefly mention that case, Keith, if you would like.
Sure. So I'm not representing him, obviously, but I'm on Twitter, and for those of you who want to follow me on Twitter, and I'm pretty active on Twitter, my handle is @IKWilson, @IKWilson. And my pinned tweet from January 9th, 2021, so this would be after we were into COVID, and my pinned tweet reads as follows, and it's relevant to the pastor's situation in my view. I say this, and this is actually true, a true life experience of mine in my undergraduate degree when I was studying political philosophy. And my tweet says, I remember studying Voltaire in university. and wondering how any civil society could ever have considered constraining free speech to be a good idea.
Yeah.
Like, I remember genuinely sitting there going, well, at what point in civilized history was there a ruling class that actually thought constraining free speech would lead to better things? Right? And here we are.
I know.
It's our free speech is being threatened on so many levels with these various new pieces of legislation the federal government is looking at bringing in. And it's through free speech that we learn. It's through free speech that we discover. It's through free speech that we learn our mistakes. It's through free speech and offending people that we discover things, and we realize the world isn't flat, and so we've really reached a point where we're so polarized. And obviously I'm biased, but I think those on the left are so desperate for power that they just don't want anybody to even utter the things they disagree with, so they cancel you, they silence you, the political correctness, the wokeness, and everything else. Whereas there's lots of people one of the habits I have actually on Twitter is following people I disagree with, because I want to learn from them.
Sure.
I want to learn from them. There might be something they know that I don't. There will be, for sure. Yeah. And I maybe got something wrong, and I want to learn from them. I just don't want to be in an echo chamber. That's kind of boring, actually.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think what's happened with the pastor is he just keeps speaking out, and he keeps exercising his right of free speech. And he's also trying to exercise his right of religious freedom, which we must fundamentally respect.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, we've come a long way where, it used to be those on the left that would fight for freedoms. And now they think the word freedom is a dog whistle.
I know. In fact, it's white supremacy if you go around with the Canadian flag today.
Yes. Like, how did that happen? So that'd be my comment on that.
Okay. All right. Eric, you're coming in under the bell. Eric Hernandez just sent in, do we have any chances to win in court, or is everything corrupted by government? Well, one of the things that I would say on this is that I think that and I think, Keith, you would perhaps agree, and I'll follow up with what you've already said, and that is the idea that as time is going along here, we're seeing more and more evidence as to the overreach of government. And also the way in which even the Prime Minister himself acted with respect to the Emergencies Act, to me, is evidence of just how crazy it was to invoke it to begin with. And
bouncy castles.
The hot tubs. But what we have to do is to keep going to court so that we are showing that we still have trust in the system. And we got to have that trust in the system. We got to have that hope for trust in the system, that eventually the courts are going to get the message, look, guys, this is not what you think it is. And judicial notice is something that we need to, yes, recognize, but we need to look at the evidence. Anyhow, I'm just kind of summarizing a little bit about what you have said, Keith, but perhaps you might want to add something there.
Well, I would say this, and I thought about this a little earlier when this topic came up, and I didn't quite get the idea out, I think, which is, to live in a free country is to live in a country that has institutions that aren't corrupted. And to live in a free country is to live in a country where you have trust in your institutions. And we're in an unprecedentedly dark place in Canada because the confidence in our institutions, including our courts, is very low. And I'm going to continue to work as hard as I can. I'm not interested in a fool's errand. I'm not interested in tilting at windmills.
Yeah.
I do believe that there's integrity on the bench and there's integrity in the profession. And the book of laws is a solid discipline. And so I'm going to continue to work with my outstanding legal teams to try and get some wins in the court. And, if the prime minister or the politicians want to step up and do the right thing and go ahead and undo some of the harms they've done, they don't have to wait for us to get to court. That minister can sign that letter tomorrow.
Right, right. Keith, I want to thank you so very much for your generous time here tonight. You are very articulate, and I can see why the JCCF would want you to be involved in their projects, and I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank everyone here who's been watching tonight, and we've had a fairly good audience throughout the evening. But I just want to give you one more opportunity to just share your final thought with our audience with respect to the issues we spoke with here tonight.
Sure. Well, I mean, what I think the truckers have done, and I think Premier Peckford as well, is they've given so many of us hope that not all is lost, and that there's many, many, many millions of good Canadians who are deeply concerned about what we're doing and are fighting to get us back on track. So I think we should take comfort in that and do what you can individually to get involved in any way that you can. And just so everybody's clear, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is funding several challenges in the courts, including two that I've been talking about. And I'm operating and providing my services at a very significantly reduced rate upon the instructions of my higher authority, my wife, who has volunteered me for this stuff, and I'm happy to do that. But we do have an extensive array of lawyers and paralegals that we need to fund. So if anybody is thinking about financially helping us, I'm putting a lot in, and I'm happy to do that. But we need a lot of horsepower, legal horsepower, to take on these tyrants. And please consider going to the jccf.ca, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. They're a registered charity. So if you make a donation and you can pick which case you want to support, you actually get a tax receipt that helps you at tax time. So if people would be willing to do that, I would be grateful, and it'll help us keep the fight going.
Great. And you mentioned your Twitter account. Can you just mention that again? And also your website?
Yeah. So if you're interested in knowing a little bit, I haven't had a chance to update my website for a little while. I've been a little busy. But it's you just search Keith Wilson lawyer, and it'll come up, and there'll be some other interesting hits you'll get about some cases I've had in the past. But Wilson Law Office is my firm name. And then my Twitter handle is @IK Wilson. Okay,
great. Well, thanks again, Keith. I really very much appreciate your sharing with us tonight and just taking this time. And I want to thank you, our listeners, for tuning in tonight to our live stream here at First Freedoms. And First Freedoms, as you know, is an organization. We are a nonprofit. We're not a charity. But we do appreciate your gifts to keep us going. And we, too, are also involved in taking on cases. We do not have charitable status, and that is a principle that we have taken as we started this organization, simply because we want to be able to speak out with respect to government without having to worry about government taking away our charitable status because we say something they don't like us to say. And so that's why we have taken the stand we have. And we are involved in a couple of cases that we'll be able to share with you in the coming days. But I want to just ask you if you would be so kind on this, wherever you're seeing this live stream. We do live stream on Facebook, but also on Rumble. And if you're watching anything that we show, make sure you click on the like button and please share it. Also, you may notice that on some of the social media, we are not there, or we'll have some of our videos there, but not others. And that is because we have been part of the cancel culture, or we've been having the effects of the cancel culture because big tech doesn't like what we're saying. And even tonight, already Facebook algorithms have already put up a notice saying that we're talking about COVID and you need to pay attention to what they're saying about COVID. Anyhow, we just want to let you know that you may find some differences between the different platforms. My final thought is this: you may not agree with everything that is said here, and perhaps you don't agree with anything we've said here tonight. But we encourage you, and we want to thank you for being part of our audience, because here at First Freedoms, we are concerned about open, honest, and transparent discussion and dialogue. And if you have been with us, and even though you disagree with us, I want to thank you for being part of our audience tonight. And until next time, I'm Barry Bussey.